In the early 1100s, as candlelight slid restlessly across cold stone walls, Saint Hildegard of Bingen suddenly halted, sensing movement beyond time itself, where future nations shifted unseen and conflicts began forming long before history would ever name them. The chamber remained silent, yet the light subtly changed direction, clinging to some surfaces while abandoning others, creating tension that felt less like danger and more like approach, similar to distant thunder sensed before sound arrives. What emerged was not chaos but alignment. As decisions tightened, loyalties narrowed, and populations slowly leaned the same direction. Each movement harmless alone, yet together forming momentum that pushed history forward without announcing itself.
My God, help me.
Breath shortening as warmth gathered behind her eyes, because the vision carried weight, revealing that future wars would not ignite suddenly, but mature quietly through neglected conscience and delayed moral resistance. Stillness deepened into pressure, transforming silence into warning, suggesting that collapse rarely announces urgency, and that the most dangerous shifts occur when everything appears orderly, justified, and disturbingly reasonable. In her writings, Saint Hildegard of Bingen focused not on clashing armies but on earlier fractures, tracing how pride dulls vision, fear contracts mercy, and entire societies begin moving together without knowing who sets their direction. The vision advanced relentlessly beyond her century, revealing repeating cycles with sharper edges, where humanity failed not through ignorance but through memory, recalling past destruction and still stepping toward its familiar shape. Light shifted again, narrowing deliberately, isolating a fragile detail that could easily be missed, showing that wars accelerate where inner life thins, faith becomes routine, vigilance softens, and unity erodes long before banners rise. Her breathing slowed by discipline rather than peace, because the revelation demanded restraint, insisting that seeing ahead carried responsibility and that warning without panic required strength greater than fear itself. Beyond the walls, daily life continued uninterrupted, footsteps echoing and bells marking time precisely, sharpening the contrast between surface calm and hidden momentum that often precedes history's most violent turns. She understood then that future conflicts would not arrive with alarms, but seep slowly into language, choices, and loyalties, until movement replaced reflection and humanity realized too late that invisible lines had already been crossed. When the vision finally loosened its grip, Saint Hildegard of Bingen remained motionless, knowing what she recorded was not merely prophecy, but an unfinished warning, waiting centuries for listeners brave enough to recognize themselves inside it. As the vision settled deeper, Saint Hildegard of Bingen felt time compress, pulling distant centuries closer, revealing not isolated wars but a sequence, where one conflict awakened another, each louder, faster, and spiritually emptier than the last. Images shifted rapidly, like scenes cut too fast, showing lands hardening their borders, voices sharpening their language, and crowds feeding on certainty, while doubt was pushed aside as weakness, hesitation, or betrayal. Movement dominated every scene, not charging armies yet, but preparations. Hands signing decrees, bodies turning away from neighbors, eyes learning to see enemies where faces once felt familiar. The pace intensified, revealing how conflict accelerates once momentum replaces reflection. When decisions are made faster than conscience can respond, and action becomes addictive simply because stopping would require unbearable self-examination. Light played unpredictably across the vision, flaring briefly on certain moments, then dimming, suggesting that truth rarely disappears, but is often overwhelmed, drowned beneath urgency, slogans, and the comfort of collective direction. Through this unfolding sequence, Saint Hildegard of Bingen recognized patterns she had witnessed in her own life. Authority resisting correction, devotion becoming routine, and spiritual warning dismissed whenever it disrupted order or comfort. The vision tightened its focus, revealing that wars rarely begin with hatred alone, but with exhaustion. Souls too tired to listen, hearts too guarded to yield, and communities choosing speed over wisdom. Every transition carried momentum, pushing forward without pause, as if history itself leaned downhill, requiring effort not to advance, but to resist sliding toward familiar cycles of collapse and regret. Her posture remained composed, yet tension lived in her stillness, because the vision insisted that knowing the pattern did not grant immunity, and that awareness alone could not prevent repetition without courage to interrupt it. Beyond the revelation, the world continued breathing normally, reinforcing a dangerous truth. Societies often sleepwalk into conflict, mistaking stability for safety and routine for moral health. The sequence did not end in destruction yet, but in acceleration, leaving the unsettling impression that the most critical moment always arrives earlier than expected, precisely when intervention still feels optional. As the vision paused, Saint Hildegard of Bingen understood that what terrified her was not the wars themselves, but how easily humanity rehearsed them, long before believing they were inevitable. As the vision intensified, Saint Hildegard of Bingen sensed urgency replacing distance, showing futures no longer abstract, but pressing closer, where ignored warnings transformed into consequences, and hesitation became the silent ally of approaching catastrophe. Scenes unfolded rapidly, marked by decisive gestures. Doors closing, alliances forming overnight, words spoken too quickly to be reconsidered. Each action small in isolation, yet together accelerating events beyond the point where reversal felt possible. The atmosphere carried motion without noise, suggesting that collapse does not require chaos, only persistence. As systems strain quietly, relationships thin, and responsibility dissolves into shared momentum that no single voice dares to interrupt. Light fractured sharply across the vision, isolating moments of choice, emphasizing that history turns not on grand speeches, but on brief seconds where courage hesitates and convenience quietly wins. The pace became relentless, driven by reaction rather than intention, revealing how societies slide into conflict not because they desire destruction, but because slowing down feels more dangerous than moving forward blindly. Through this tightening sequence, Saint Hildegard of Bingen recognized a familiar failure, the refusal to pause, to listen, to repent, knowing that spiritual deafness often precedes physical violence, long before weapons appear. Movement overtook meaning, as action replaced discernment, and momentum rewarded speed rather than wisdom, creating an environment where restraint looked like weakness and caution was misread as disloyalty. The vision surged forward, exposing a dangerous illusion, that catastrophe arrives suddenly, while in truth it is patiently assembled through repeated neglect, normalized aggression, and countless moments where conscience is postponed. Her stillness contrasted the chaos she witnessed, embodying resistance through restraint, as if her very refusal to rush stood as quiet opposition to the accelerating future pressing against her awareness. Beyond the vision, ordinary rhythms continued uninterrupted, reinforcing a brutal truth. History's most destructive shifts often unfold beneath routines that feel harmless, familiar, and undeserving of scrutiny. The sequence pressed toward inevitability, not because fate demanded it, but because resistance required effort, humility, and delay, virtues consistently abandoned when speed promises clarity and unity feels intoxicating. As the vision steadied, Saint Hildegard of Bingen understood the true warning. Wars are not born in moments of hatred, but in seasons where restraint is mocked and conscience is repeatedly asked to wait. As the vision shifted again, Saint Hildegard of Bingen sensed resistance fading, revealing futures where warnings were heard but postponed, acknowledged but deprioritized, until urgency dissolved into routine and danger learned to move unnoticed among ordinary days. Scenes accelerated, showing councils debating endlessly, leaders delaying decisions, and communities mistaking patience for wisdom, while pressure continued building beneath the surface, invisible yet relentless. Movement returned sharply, not as violence yet, but as preparation. Resources shifting, loyalties hardening, voices rising, each adjustment justified as temporary, even as the pattern locked itself into permanence. Light swept unevenly across the vision, briefly illuminating moments where intervention was possible, then sliding away, emphasizing how opportunity does not vanish loudly, but fades quietly when left unattended. The tempo intensified further, driven by habit rather than intention, revealing how repeated delay creates momentum of its own, making reversal feel increasingly unrealistic with every passing choice. Within this unfolding inertia, Saint Hildegard of Bingen identified the most dangerous failure, confusing peace with absence of noise and mistaking delay for discernment, while fracture quietly advanced. The vision pressed closer, showing that once warning loses urgency, responsibility diffuses, allowing everyone to wait for someone else to act, until no one remains positioned to intervene effectively. Energy surged through the sequence, exposing how systems accelerate once delay becomes normalized, rewarding indecision with comfort and punishing restraint with isolation. Her expression remained controlled, yet urgency vibrated beneath it, because the vision made clear that collapse rarely begins with action, but with tolerated inaction accumulating unnoticed. Beyond the vision, familiar rhythms persisted. Meals prepared, prayers recited, routines maintained, reinforcing how easily spiritual alertness is dulled by continuity that feels reassuring rather than dangerous. The sequence reached a threshold where movement no longer required intent, only momentum, leaving the unsettling sense that the final descent often begins after the last ignored warning. As the vision steadied once more, Saint Hildegard of Bingen understood that the gravest danger was not conflict itself, but humanity's talent for postponing response until prevention quietly expires. As the vision reached its final clarity, Saint Hildegard of Bingen sensed not an ending, but a handoff, where future generations stood poised between repetition and interruption, carrying the weight of choices she could reveal but never enforce. The sequence slowed just enough to sharpen awareness, drawing attention to moments where restraint could still redirect momentum, proving that inevitability is often assumed long before it is truly sealed. Light settled steadily now, no longer flickering, suggesting that clarity arrives only after urgency peaks, when distraction fades and responsibility can no longer be deferred without consequence. Movement remained present, but controlled, emphasizing that decisive action does not require chaos, only resolve, and that history changes course most often through deliberate interruption rather than dramatic force. The vision framed a quiet truth. Collapse accelerates when everyone waits, but recovery begins the instant someone accepts delay as a moral failure rather than a neutral choice. Within this closing awareness, Saint Hildegard of Bingen recognized her role clearly, not as a commander of outcomes, but as a witness whose task was to preserve the signal, even if generations chose to ignore it. The tension eased without vanishing, leaving a productive discomfort, the kind that invites reflection instead of panic, and asks whether recognition will finally lead to interruption rather than repetition. Energy condensed into focus, showing that the future is shaped less by prediction than by response, and that awareness alone gains power only when translated into timely restraint. Her composure reflected conviction rather than relief, because the vision offered no comfort, only clarity, insisting that knowledge without courage merely sharpens regret. Beyond the revelation, life continued with familiar rhythm, yet the contrast now carried weight, reminding that ordinary moments are precisely where interruption must begin to matter. The sequence closed without spectacle, reinforcing that the greatest warnings rarely end with noise, but with a question left deliberately unanswered, waiting to be resolved through action rather than belief alone. As silence reclaimed the moment, Saint Hildegard of Bingen understood the final truth. The future remains open not because danger is uncertain, but because response is still possible. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, faithful witness of truth, stand with us as we face moments where silence feels safer than courage. Teach us to recognize delay when it disguises itself as wisdom, and restraint when it is mocked as weakness. Pray that we do not mistake routine for peace or familiarity for righteousness. Strengthen our hearts to interrupt what must not continue, to act when conscience calls, and to respond before regret takes root. May clarity not arrive too late, and may courage rise before consequences do. Saint Hildegard of Bingen, pray that we choose response while response is still possible.